On September 5, 2007, the FBI didn't arrest a hacker, they arrested their own worst mistake. At 2:17 p.m., 6 federal agents exploded through the door of a fourth-floor apartment in San Francisco's Oakwood complex, weapons, raised voices, shouting commands that echoed off bare walls and humming servers. The man they were there for didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even stand up. He froze at his keyboard, fingers hovering mid-sentence as if he already knew resistance was pointless. Behind him, 17 servers glowed in the dim light, radiating heat, quietly processing transactions in an underground economy worth hundreds of millions of dollars. On those machines sat 1.8 million stolen credit card numbers, enough data to drain lives, ruin families, and trigger $500 million in fraud. His name was Max Butler, and to the agents cuffing his hands, he was the most prolific cybercriminal America had ever seen. But buried in sealed case files and forgotten memos was a truth far more disturbing. The same FBI arresting him had once paid him $1,000 a week, trusted him with classified techniques, and relied on him to protect the nation's most sensitive computer systems. The same man, now labeled a criminal mastermind, had previously patched 48,000 vulnerable government servers, including Pentagon and military networks, preventing what intelligence officials feared could have been a digital Pearl Harbor. The Bureau didn't just fail to stop Max Butler. They trained him, empowered him, and then lost control of him. This is not a story about hacking. It's a story about power ambition, and what happens when a system creates a weapon without deciding who it's really meant to protect. Meridian, Idaho, 1986. Long before courtrooms, indictments, and encrypted servers, Max Butler was just a quiet boy sitting alone in the back room of a public library. He was 10 years old when he discovered the abandoned Commodore 64 beige plastic, outdated even for its time, ignored by everyone else. While his parents' divorce split his life between 2 houses that never felt like home, the computer offered something neither parent could: stability. It followed rules. It responded logically. It never lied. In a town where other kids chased rodeo prizes and football glory, Max stayed after closing hours typing basic commands until the librarian flicked the lights at 9:00 p.m., forcing him to leave. The machine became his refuge, his teacher, and eventually his mirror. By 14, curiosity turned into experimentation. Max cracked his school district's password system using a simple dictionary attack, cycling through common words until Pencil unlocked the administrator account. He didn't change his own grades. Instead, he altered random records, C students suddenly earning A's, creating confusion that took administrators weeks to unravel. When caught, Max claimed he was testing security. He received a 3-day suspension. He spent those 3 days learning assembly language. By 16, Max was no longer one person online. He was many. Different names, different reputations, all carefully maintained in underground bulletin boards where skill mattered more than identity. Each successful intrusion reinforced a dangerous lesson. Systems were predictable, people were not. And control, real control, belonged to those who understood the rules better than those who wrote them. Even then, the pattern was forming. Not rebellion, not greed, but an obsession with mastery and the quiet thrill of standing where no one else could reach. By early 1998, the internet was quietly standing on the edge of collapse. A critical buffer overflow vulnerability had been discovered in Bind, the DNS software responsible for routing roughly 80% of global internet traffic. The fix already existed. The danger was no longer theoretical. What no one wanted to confront was how few systems had bothered to install the patch. When Max Butler began scanning servers, the numbers stunned even him. Out of 45,000 US government systems, fewer than 2% were secured. The Pentagon was exposed. NASA was exposed. Research facilities tied to nuclear weapons and military logistics were exposed. One malicious worm launched by the wrong actor could have crippled communications, disrupted defense coordination, and shattered public trust within hours. Intelligence officials would later call the scenario a cyber Pearl Harbor. At the time, no one was acting. Max stared at his screen for 3 days without meaningful sleep, running simulations over and over. He understood the math. He understood the timelines. He also understood a brutal truth: waiting for official authorization meant accepting disaster. On March 12, 1998, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. From an internet cafe in Berkeley routing traffic through compromised university servers in Sweden, Brazil, and South Korea, Max released his worm. It spread with surgical efficiency, exploiting the vulnerability, downloading the official patch, and securing systems faster than any coordinated government response ever could. Within 6 hours, 8,000 machines were fixed. Within 12, more than 20,000. In 6 days, 48,000 servers were no longer vulnerable, but buried inside the code were 23 extra lines. After patching each machine, the worm installed a hidden backdoor, a reverse shell that quietly phoned home every 4 hours, granting Max root access. He told himself it was insurance, a way to verify success, yet the weight of the truth was impossible to ignore. In trying to save the internet, Max had crossed a line no civilian had ever crossed before. He now controlled more US government computers than any hacker in history. The system was safe, and he was no longer just observing it. He was inside it. The knock came just after dawn on July 2nd, 1998, sharp and deliberate, the kind that leaves no room for confusion. When Max Butler opened the door of his Berkeley apartment, he wasn't surprised to see FBI agents standing there alongside a US Air Force cyber officer. He had already watched their investigation unfold in real time, tracing their digital footsteps through the very back doors he had installed. They entered calmly, efficiently, reading a search warrant that listed 15 computers. Max owned 16. As agents photographed equipment and cataloged drives, he didn't argue. He explained everything instead: the vulnerability, the worm, the patching, the back doors, the motivation. He spoke quickly, almost desperately, as if clarity itself could absolve him. One agent cut him off with a sentence that hung in the air like a threat. "You had root access on classified military systems. You could have started a war." Max shook his head. "I stopped one," he said. He believed it. 20 minutes later, the tone shifted. A phone call was made. When the agent returned, the offer sounded unreal. The charges that could put Max in federal prison for 25 years would disappear if he agreed to work for them. Quietly, informally, no paperwork, no immunity. In exchange, he would become their inside man, infiltrating hacker crews the Bureau couldn't penetrate. They would pay him $1,000 a week and call him by a code name pulled from a bad action movie, Equalizer. In that moment, Max felt something he hadn't felt in years: validation. His skills weren't just dangerous, they were valuable, necessary. He accepted before the sentence was finished. What the FBI didn't fully grasp was what they were handing him. They weren't just recruiting talent, they were teaching classified investigative methods, surveillance techniques, and tradecraft to someone whose relationship with rules had always been conditional. They believed control came from authority. Max understood control came from knowledge, and once learned knowledge doesn't belong to anyone forever. For a time, cooperation felt like redemption. Max Butler did exactly what the FBI asked of him. He built new identities, earned trust in underground circles, and quietly mapped criminal networks that law enforcement had failed to penetrate for years. Arrests followed. Headlines followed. From the Bureau's perspective, the arrangement worked. From Max's, it felt like purpose. His skills finally mattered for something larger than himself. But that fragile balance shattered the moment the FBI pushed him beyond criminals and into conscience. They asked him to target a man he knew personally, a security consultant, a father, someone operating in legal gray areas but not committing a crime. The request wasn't about justice. It was about leverage. Max hesitated, then refused. He had crossed lines before, but this one felt irreversible. The response was immediate and merciless. Subpoenas replaced phone calls. Conversations turned into interrogations. When Max declined to testify, the Bureau unveiled the charges they had been holding in reserve, all along 15 felony counts of computer intrusion, conspiracy, and unlawful interception of communications. Each carried up to 5 years in federal prison. Cooperation, it turned out, had never been protection. It had been a leash. In that moment, Max understood the unspoken rule: assets are disposable once they become inconvenient. The same system that had empowered him now moved to erase him. Prison stripped away any remaining illusions. Inside, Max learned a harsher lesson than any hack had taught him. Loyalty to institutions is conditional, but consequences are permanent. He read, observed, and thought relentlessly. By the time he walked out, he no longer believed in redemption through cooperation. He believed in systems and in building ones that could not betray him. The FBI had intended to neutralize a risk. Instead, they had refined it. And when Max stepped back into the world, he carried with him something far more dangerous than anger clarity. When Max Butler walked out of federal prison in early 2003, freedom felt thinner than confinement. He left with $25 in gate money, a felony record that barred him from legitimate tech work, and a world that had moved on without him. San Francisco was louder, faster, more connected, and far more vulnerable than before. Max slept on couches, took cash-only freelance jobs under false names, and watched the underground economy evolve in real time. Carding forums flourished in the shadows, selling stolen credit card numbers like commodities. Yet everywhere he looked, Max saw inefficiency. Vendors sold dead cards. Scammers poisoned trust. Forums collapsed under their own incompetence. To Max, it wasn't just crime, it was bad architecture. He studied the ecosystem the way he once studied networks, mapping flows of data money and human weakness. He understood both sides of the equation, how systems were breached, and how investigations hunted those breaches. The FBI had taught him how law enforcement thought. Prison had taught him how systems failed. Together they formed something dangerous. Max didn't see himself as returning to crime. He saw himself correcting a market. Control, he realized, wasn't about hiding. It was about structure, rules, enforcement, predictability. The same principles that made legitimate corporations thrive could be repurposed in the dark. Adopting a new identity. Max chose a name that reflected his emotional state more than his ambition, Iceman. Not because of bravado, but because feeling nothing was safer than feeling betrayed. His first intrusions were precise and quiet, point-of-sale systems running outdated software networks no one bothered to secure. Data flowed in clean streams, profits followed. What began as survival quickly became design. Max wasn't improvising anymore. He was building. By the summer of 2006, Max Butler stopped thinking like a criminal and started thinking like a CEO. The underground forums he depended on were fractured, inefficient, and fragile, four competing marketplaces, fighting over the same 6,000 users, each riddled with scams, weak security, and amateur administrators. To Max, the problem wasn't law enforcement pressure, it was bad management. On August 22, 2006, sitting in a sweltering studio apartment in San Francisco's Tenderloin district, surrounded by 16 running machines and 4 glowing monitors, he executed a plan that had taken 3 months to design. One by one, he exploited rival forums using custom scripts, SQL injections, default credentials, plaintext passwords, so careless they felt insulting. Each takeover took less than 30 seconds. Databases were copied. User records were exfiltrated. Then, without ceremony, entire communities were erased. By early evening, 4 major forums no longer existed. Minutes later, 6,000 inboxes received the same message. Consolidation notice. Their previous forums, Max wrote, had merged into a single professional marketplace. Usernames and passwords remained unchanged. Disputes would be honored. Stability had arrived. He signed the message with a title no hacker had ever claimed before Iceman CEO. Carter's Market launched not as chaos, but as infrastructure. Encrypted messaging using PGP, automated escrow to eliminate fraud, vendor quality checks enforced by random test purchases, a 2% commission on every transaction. Within weeks, the market processed over $100,000 in sales. By October, revenue hit $30,000 a week. The forums filled with stolen credit cards, social security numbers, bank logins, passports, even medical records, entire lives reduced to structured data. Max monitored everything, writing thousands of lines of code to track behavior, flag anomalies, and identify infiltrators. This wasn't survival anymore. It was dominance. He had built something more than a criminal network. He had built a parallel economy cleaner, faster, and more disciplined than the systems meant to stop it. And for the first time, Max wasn't reacting to pressure. He was setting the rules. The system didn't collapse because of a flaw in the code. It collapsed because of a flaw in people. For all his discipline, Max Butler had always known this truth. Software followed logic. Humans followed impulse. The breach came not from a keyboard in San Francisco, but from a luxury store in Orange County on May 12, 2007. Christopher Aragon, Max's real-world partner, walked into a Bloomingdale's carrying counterfeit cards encoded with stolen data. The magnetic strip read clean. The purchase should have gone through. But 3 minutes earlier, the same card had been used at a gas station in Vermont. The alert was automatic. Security reacted fast. Aragon ran and made it less than 15 feet. Inside his car, apartment investigators found everything Max had spent years protecting: 147 counterfeit cards, 80,000 stolen numbers, cash, drugs, weapons, and handwritten notes tying the operation together. The arrest triggered a chain reaction that no firewall could stop. Associates were picked up within 48 hours. Families cracked under pressure. Information leaked. Max learned about the arrest through a news article, not a warning. He wiped drives, destroyed phones, packed servers into a van, but it was already too late. Control had slipped not through a hack, but through trust. The most carefully engineered system in the underground unraveled the same way most empires do, one human mistake at a time. By the time Max Butler stood before a federal judge in February 2010, the case was no longer about hacking. It was about containment. Prosecutors stacked the numbers until they felt unreal. 161 federal counts, an estimated $52 million in damages, a criminal enterprise that spanned years and continents. The offer was simple and brutal. Plead guilty and accept 13 years, or go to trial and risk spending the rest of his life in prison. Max understood systems well enough to recognize an unwinnable equation. He took the deal. 13 years, 156 months, no early release, no heroics. At sentencing, the courtroom expected defiance or remorse. Instead, Max spoke about addiction, not to drugs or money, but to control, to the feeling of watching thousands of machines respond to commands only he understood, to being 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He admitted that power had rewired his sense of reality, that the silence of systems obeying him had become easier to live with than people. He apologized to victims he would never meet, knowing banks and insurers would absorb the losses while trust the real currency was gone for good. As the sentence was read, Max didn't look shocked. He looked resolved. The system he once mastered had finally closed around him, and for the first time in years, there was nothing left to optimize. When Max Butler walked out of federal prison in 2021, the world he had once dominated no longer needed him. Credit card fraud had given way to cryptocurrency scams, ransomware syndicates, and automated attacks powered by artificial intelligence. The underground had evolved faster and colder, absorbing lessons Max helped write and moving beyond him without hesitation. He stepped into a society that barely remembered his name, yet still lived inside systems shaped by the era he helped define. For those who investigated his case, the lingering question was never whether Max was guilty. It was whether his trajectory had been inevitable. Was he a criminal who briefly assisted the FBI, or an asset shaped by government power, and then discarded once his usefulness expired? His story refuses to settle into a clean moral. It lingers because it mirrors a larger truth about modern systems. Talent exploited without guidance doesn't disappear, it mutates. Max Butler wasn't born a monster, and he wasn't created in a vacuum. He was the product of incentives, pressure, and access sharpened by institutions that believed control could be outsourced without consequence. In the end, his legacy isn't measured in stolen numbers or prison years, but in the question he leaves behind when systems reward mastery without ethics: who is truly responsible for the damage that follows. Max Butler's story isn't just about hacking, it's a warning about how modern systems treat talent, power, and responsibility. When skill is rewarded without ethics, when institutions weaponize intelligence but refuse accountability, the damage doesn't stay contained. It spreads. In a digital world where control scales faster than conscience, the real threat isn't code, it's the incentives behind it. This case forces a hard question every society must face. Are we building systems that guide human potential, or ones that quietly manufacture their own disasters? If this story made you think like the video, if you believe others should hear this warning, share it. And if you want more investigations into the hidden systems shaping our world, subscribe.